Victoria Lane, 35, sits alone in the sleek, humming private jet, fingertips still tingling from a fleeting, forbidden glance shared with her billionaire boss, Ethan Caldwell, 46. 2 years of flawless professionalism, quiet dedication, and late nights anticipating his every need all now teeter on the edge of disaster. The air is thick with tension, the faint aroma of coffee mingling with her racing heartbeat. Ethan Caldwell, a man revered for his precision, control, and unyielding intellect, hides cracks beneath the steel of his exterior, and Victoria knows them perhaps better than anyone. But a single glance, a moment of reckless closeness, has shattered the fragile walls between duty and desire. As the jet glides over San Francisco, questions swirl like the city lights below. Can professionalism survive when the heart rebels? What happens when love, fear, and responsibility collide in ways neither of them anticipated? And when secrets rise to the surface, who will stand firm and who will break dive into a story of ambition, forbidden attraction, and life-changing consequences? Hit, like, share, and subscribe to follow Victoria and Ethan's journey, because some choices echo far beyond the boardroom. The private jet hummed with its steady rhythm, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in Victoria Lane's chest. She sat alone, the leather seat cool beneath her palms, her fingertips still tingling from the fleeting touch she could not stop replaying in her mind. Her heart pounded so fiercely it almost competed with the hum of the engines, and she pressed her fingers against her lips, as if she could erase the memory by sheer will. She had crossed a line she had promised herself she would never approach. 2 years. 2 years of flawless service to Ethan Caldwell. 2 years of precision, anticipation, and careful distance. Victoria's mind wandered over the long nights spent drafting presentations, coordinating multi-million-dollar deals, and predicting his every need before he even realized them. She remembered the way he had once paused mid-meeting to glance at her, a faint acknowledgement that made her chest tighten for reasons she refused to name. Those moments had always been brief, professional, almost imperceptible, yet they left an echo she carried with her like a secret. The jet cabin smelled faintly of leather and coffee. Victoria inhaled deeply, letting the aroma settle around her, grounding her in the moment. The faint hum of the engines beneath her feet was soothing, almost meditative, but it could not silence the storm in her chest. She pressed her hands against her thighs, willing herself to focus on the spreadsheets she had left open on the tray table. Numbers blurred together as her thoughts inevitably returned to him. Ethan Caldwell. The name alone carried weight. At 46, he was a titan in his industry, commanding boardrooms with a precision that left competitors in awe. He ran his sustainable tech empire as if every decision were a calculation in a formula only he could understand. Yet, beneath that steel exterior, Victoria had glimpsed cracks, moments when the rigid control faltered just slightly, revealing the man beneath the mask. She thought back to the last meeting, the one where she had caught him off guard with a question only someone who truly understood him could ask. The faint shift in his eyes, the way his jaw had tensed and then relaxed, lingered in her memory. There was charisma in every calculated movement he made, yet she had begun to notice the shadows of fatigue, the small, human tremors that he never allowed anyone else to see. Those cracks had fascinated her, drawing her closer without warning, making each glance feel heavier than it should. Victoria's pulse quickened as she recalled the fleeting moment before takeoff. A glance had lingered just a second too long, a brief contact that had ignited emotions both of them were not ready to confront. She closed her eyes, letting the sensation wash over her in private. She felt both exhilaration and guilt, a blend she had never experienced in such intensity. Attraction, she told herself, was one thing. Crossing the invisible line of professionalism, even in a thought, was another entirely. Her gaze wandered across the cabin. The seats gleamed in the dim light, the polished metal accents reflecting the muted glow from the overhead panels. She could see the tiny window near her, the clouds drifting past silently as the aircraft climbed higher. San Francisco awaited below, Yet in this suspended world, time seemed to stretch. Each second of engine hum, each faint vibration, seemed to echo the heartbeat she could not calm. She pressed her fingertips to her temples, trying to steady the rapid rhythm of her pulse. Her thoughts were a tangle of what-ifs and should-not-haves. She remembered the professional distance she had maintained so diligently, the rules she had followed like a shield. And now, with that single glance, everything had shifted. She had glimpsed the man behind the empire, a man who was capable of emotion, desire, and, perhaps most dangerously, vulnerability. Victoria thought about the day she had joined Ethan's team. She had been meticulous, ambitious, and eager to prove herself. Every task had been executed with care, every expectation met before it was voiced. She had become fluent in the unspoken language of Ethan Caldwell's moods, learning to anticipate stress and pressure, to navigate his rare flashes of vulnerability, and to provide the stability that even he did not realize he needed. She had been the anchor in his storm, the constant presence in a life that often demanded perfection at all costs. Yet, perfection was not impervious to the subtle forces of human emotion. Victoria could feel the shift in the air, the subtle tension that had ignited in that brief exchange before the jet had taken off. She could recall the spark in his eyes, the almost imperceptible pause before he regained his composure. That pause had been enough to remind her that he was not just a boss, not just a billionaire with a meticulously constructed persona. He was a man, and for a fraction of a heartbeat, he had revealed it. Her stomach fluttered with the memory, a mixture of excitement and fear that made her hands tremble slightly. She pressed them into her lap, trying to will herself back to focus on the documents before her. Numbers, charts, graphs. These were her comfort, the predictable elements of her life. Yet even the numbers could not distract her from the resonance of that glance, the way it had lingered, the unspoken acknowledgement of something neither of them could yet name. Victoria's eyes drifted to the small mirror on the cabin wall. She could see her reflection, tousled hair slightly disturbed by the hum of the aircraft, lips still carrying the memory of that fleeting contact. She splashed a small amount of water on her face, letting the droplets run down her cheeks. The coldness was grounding, a brief return to reality as she tried to reconstruct the walls that moment had dismantled. She smoothed the lapels of her blazer, adjusted her posture, and reminded herself of the rules she had followed for so long. Yet the hum of the jet, the gentle swaying above the clouds, the faint scent of coffee, all of it, conspired to pull her back toward the thought she could not escape. She knew that in a matter of hours, she would step off this aircraft and return to the world of schedules, meetings, and deadlines. She would resume her carefully constructed professional persona, but a fragment of that moment would remain, tucked away in the quiet recesses of her heart. Victoria exhaled slowly, letting her hands rest in her lap. She could feel the lingering warmth of what had passed, the almost imperceptible electric charge in the air. It was dangerous, she knew, yet it was also exhilarating, a reminder that even in a world dictated by efficiency and calculation, the human heart remained unpredictable. And as she glanced once more at the faint outlines of clouds below, she understood that this moment, brief as it had been, had changed something fundamental. With one final exhale, she stood and walked toward the small cabin sink. Water splashed against her wrists as she washed her hands, the cold liquid grounding her in the present. She studied her reflection carefully, reapplying a touch of lipstick, smoothing her hair, composing the expression that she would wear for the remainder of the flight. She let the water run over her fingertips, imagining that, with it, she could wash away the intensity of that lingering glance. Yet she knew, with a certainty that made her chest tighten, that it was not so easily erased. It had ignited a spark that would not easily die, a subtle awareness of emotions that both terrified and thrilled her. And as she turned back to her seat, the hum of the engines filling the quiet space around her, she allowed herself the smallest, almost imperceptible smile. San Francisco awaited below, a city full of promise and challenges, and Victoria Lane would descend into it carrying a new awareness of the man she had served so faithfully, and the danger that came with recognizing the fragile humanity behind the polished steel of Ethan Caldwell. And in that suspended moment, she realized that the professional lines she had drawn were far thinner than she had ever imagined, and that crossing them, even briefly, had consequences she could neither anticipate nor deny. As she returned to her seat, Victoria let the quiet settle around her, the faint aroma of coffee mingling with the hum of the jet, a subtle reminder that the world outside remained unchanged, even as the world inside her chest had shifted irreversibly. The moment had passed, but its echo would linger, waiting for the next choice, the next glance, the next heartbeat that might draw her into the depths she had never intended to explore. Victoria's reflection on 2 years of service and her careful balance of professionalism versus burgeoning emotion sets the stage for the next phase of tension as she prepares to step into the skyscraper world of San Francisco offices. The elevator chimed softly as it glided upward, the brushed steel interior reflecting Victoria Lane's poised, measured expression. She adjusted the leather strap of her bag, her fingers brushing the polished metal buttons almost absent-mindedly, and allowed herself a deep inhale. The scent of her subtle perfume mingled with the faint aroma of disinfectant and coffee that seemed to linger in the lobby. She had been in this building countless times, yet today, as she walked through the revolving doors, the space felt simultaneously familiar and alien. Each gleaming corridor, each wall of glass stretching toward the ceiling, reminded her that she occupied a world built on precision and expectation. Victoria's steps echoed lightly against the polished marble floor. Her shoes, perfectly polished but unassuming, clicked in measured cadence. She glanced briefly at the receptionist, offering a polite nod. No words passed, but the acknowledgement conveyed what they both knew: she belonged here. Yet every move had consequences. Victoria's pulse quickened slightly, not from exertion, but from the awareness that the eyes of the building and of Ethan Caldwell were attuned to her presence. Ethan Caldwell. His name alone demanded focus. At 46, he wielded power with quiet certainty. His office, perched near the top floors of the skyscraper, was a sanctuary of glass and steel, commanding panoramic views of the bay. He could see every corner of the city, yet no one could see into the carefully constructed walls of his persona. Victoria had spent 2 years learning those walls, tracing the subtle rhythms of his temper, the almost imperceptible shifts that revealed exhaustion, frustration, or rare vulnerability. Today, the rhythm of corporate life unfolded with familiar intensity. Boardrooms hummed with quiet deliberation, the clatter of keyboards punctuating moments of concentrated silence. Analysts reviewed spreadsheets, their faces illuminated by the glow of monitors. Outside the windows, fog drifted lazily past, a soft contrast to the sharp angles and precise lines within the office. Victoria moved through the space with ease, her steps measured, her presence unobtrusive yet quietly commanding. She anticipated schedules, potential bottlenecks, and Ethan's habitual preferences. Every gesture, from the placement of documents to the subtle alignment of presentation slides, was executed with a fluidity that had earned her quiet respect among her colleagues. Ethan, meanwhile, conducted his meetings with laser focus. His voice was calm, precise, and deliberate. He posed questions, analyzed projections, and dictated strategic adjustments with a clarity that left little room for ambiguity. Victoria observed from a distance at first, her eyes noting the way his jaw tensed slightly during particularly challenging discussions, the almost imperceptible pause when he weighed competing priorities. It was in these moments, fleeting though they were, that she glimpsed the humanity beneath the polished steel of his reputation. She recalled the countless hours she had spent observing him, memorizing his schedule, and mastering the art of anticipatory support. She had become fluent in the language of his moods, predicting the ebb and flow of stress before it could affect the meeting. She understood the subtle cues: the tightening of a fist, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the flicker of impatience in his posture. Each signal offered a roadmap, guiding her actions with a precision born of years of quiet observation and practiced discretion. today, that expertise would be tested. A critical meeting loomed, one with potential multi-million-dollar implications. The projections were intricate, each detail layered with significance. Victoria moved silently behind Ethan as he reviewed the final slides, adjusting charts and data points with a practiced hand. Her movements were seamless, almost invisible, yet every adjustment reinforced the near-perfect synergy between them. She felt a familiar surge of adrenaline as she anticipated his needs, supplying the exact documents he would request, highlighting key metrics before he could ask, and offering subtle corrections that preserved his presentation's flow. Ethan glanced briefly at her, a rare approving flicker in his steel-gray eyes. It lasted only a moment, but it carried weight. Victoria felt a jolt in her chest, part pride, part the unspoken tension that had never fully dissipated between them. The meeting began, and Ethan's command of the room was absolute. He spoke with confidence, weaving complex data into a coherent narrative that drew attentive nods from the board members. Victoria's notes were ready, her annotations precise, every pause, every reference was anticipated. She supplied information before questions were even fully formed, and she could feel Ethan's subtle acknowledgement in the slight tilt of his head, the brief upward glance, the almost imperceptible relaxation of his shoulders. Yet beneath the polished performance, a current of unspoken attraction lingered. Victoria felt it in the brief brush of hands as she handed over documents, in the way his eyes momentarily met hers with intensity, and in the rare glimpses of the man beyond the CEO's armor. It was an invisible tension, a thread woven into the fabric of their interaction, electrifying yet carefully contained. Victoria noted the subtle shift as the meeting progressed. Ethan's usually controlled composure displayed a flicker of vulnerability during a particularly tense discussion about acquisitions. His forehead creased slightly, his jaw softened, and for a fleeting second, he seemed to hesitate before responding. Victoria caught the nuance, adjusting her notes to ensure his statements remained flawless, her mind racing to preempt any gaps that could undermine the presentation. The board responded positively, unaware of the silent choreography behind the scenes. Ethan's authority remained unquestioned, his precision intact, but the connection between him and Victoria carried a quiet resonance. She sensed the acknowledgement of her competence in his eyes, a subtle yet potent recognition that went beyond professional courtesy. When the meeting concluded, board members departing with polite nods and expressions of satisfaction, Victoria allowed herself a moment to exhale. Her hands had moved almost automatically, smoothing papers, closing folders, and ensuring every detail aligned perfectly. She glanced at Ethan as he sank slightly into his chair, a fleeting tension in his shoulders, a subtle relaxation in his posture. For just a heartbeat, the professional barrier wavered. Victoria noticed a flicker of vulnerability in Ethan's eyes that was both fleeting and profound. It hinted at depths she had long suspected, but rarely observed so clearly. The brief acknowledgement of shared understanding, of near-perfect synchronization in thought and action, carried with it a weight of emotion that neither would speak aloud. Victoria stepped back slightly, her mind racing with the implications. The skyscraper offices, the polished floors, the hum of fluorescent lights, they were all familiar. Yet today they felt different. Every corner, every reflective surface, every precise line of glass seemed to emphasize the fragile interplay between control and emotion, between professionalism and the magnetic pull she had felt from the moment she crossed paths with him on the jet. She allowed her gaze to linger briefly on the expansive view beyond the windows. Fog rolled lazily across the bay, the soft gray light diffusing into the edges of the city. The contrast between the rigid, controlled interior and the unpredictable, fluid world outside mirrored her inner conflict. In one hand, she held the certainty of her skill and competence. In the other, the uncharted territory of attraction, tension, and a burgeoning awareness of the man she had served so faithfully. As she straightened her blazer and prepared to step toward the next meeting, Victoria carried with her a quiet acknowledgement the synergy she had displayed today was more than skill. It was a delicate dance of intuition, understanding, and unspoken connection. Ethan Caldwell's approving glance, brief though it had been, lingered in her mind, reminding her that even in a world of control and precision, the human heart remained unpredictable. And as she walked down the polished corridor toward her next responsibility, Victoria felt a subtle shift in the air, a promise of challenges to come, and the faint whisper of something deeper waiting beneath the surface of their carefully constructed professional lives. Victoria Lane's fingers hovered over the keyboard, caught mid-motion as a new email notification flashed across her screen. The subject line was innocuous at first glance, yet her chest tightened, a familiar pressure she had learned to recognize over the years. She drew in a slow breath, attempting to steady the fluttering in her stomach, and glanced toward Ethan Caldwell, who was meticulously reviewing the projections from the last board call. His expression remained composed, but Victoria could feel the undercurrent of urgency lingering in the office air, the same unspoken tension that had followed him from the conference room. The day stretched before her like a carefully arranged pattern, each task interlocking with the next. Victoria moved through her responsibilities with practiced efficiency, checking schedules, confirming meeting notes, and ensuring that every detail of the upcoming presentations was flawlessly prepared. Yet, even as her hands moved automatically, her mind wandered, reflecting on the countless late nights she had spent balancing Ethan's empire alongside her own life. She had sacrificed personal dinners, postponed calls with friends, and navigated evenings that stretched far beyond normal hours, all in silent service to a man whose attention she had learned to anticipate. The hum of the office machinery blended with the soft murmur of colleagues exchanging brief updates. Victoria's gaze occasionally flicked to Ethan as he leaned slightly over his tablet, scanning numbers with an intensity that made her chest tighten in recognition of both admiration and something more complicated. He was always precise, always in control, yet she could see the subtle signs of pressure, the twitch of his fingers, the slight tension in his jaw that told her he was human. Despite the impenetrable facade, Victoria paused to adjust a set of documents, her fingertips brushing over the polished edges. She allowed herself a fleeting moment to recall the gestures they had shared in earlier meetings, a brief touch of hands as papers were exchanged, a shared glance when a colleague's question threatened to derail a discussion, the silent acknowledgement of mutual understanding that no one else could perceive. These small intimacies had accumulated quietly over 2 years, creating an unspoken language between them. Her heart ached slightly as she recognized the duality of her position. She was both deeply invested in her professional responsibilities and equally caught in the pull of suppressed emotions. The two existed in constant tension, each glance and gesture carrying weight beyond its immediate context. Victoria reminded herself that she was capable, respected, and essential, yet the undercurrent of attraction to Ethan was a force she could neither fully deny nor entirely control. The office clock ticked steadily, a metronome for the rhythm of the day. Victoria moved from task to task with fluidity, yet her mind lingered on moments that seemed trivial to anyone else but were charged with significance to her. A flick of the hand, the way he paused when reviewing documents, the subtle shift of his gaze, all were signals she read with precision. Each interaction deepened the web of emotions she kept hidden beneath her professional exterior. As she composed a response to the urgent email, a small misstep occurred. A line of text that had been intended to clarify a scheduling conflict instead implied hesitation, an unintended pause in tone that made her chest tighten further. The slight ambiguity in her message seemed to echo louder than she intended. She could feel the tension in the office intensify, even without a direct response from Ethan. It was a reminder that even the most careful communication carried risks, that perfection could slip through the smallest cracks, and that her role was as precarious emotionally as it was professionally. Victoria leaned back in her chair for a moment, allowing her hands to rest lightly on her lap. She reflected on the countless small sacrifices she had made in the name of competence and loyalty, the late nights, the pre-dawn preparations, the constant anticipation of Ethan's needs. They were invisible to everyone else, but formed the foundation of the seamless operation that allowed his empire to function without interruption. Yet, the emotional cost was palpable. She carried with her a quiet exhaustion, a persistent awareness that her devotion came at the expense of personal freedom. Her thoughts returned briefly to the shared glances, the unspoken understanding that had grown between them. It was not merely professional synchronization. It was recognition of the human vulnerability that Ethan rarely allowed anyone to see. She remembered the subtle relaxation in his shoulders when she anticipated his needs during high-pressure moments. The faint, fleeting approval in his eyes that acknowledged her not just as a secretary, but as someone who understood him in a way few ever could. Victoria's pulse quickened slightly as she drafted her next email, aware that every word carried weight, that even minor imprecision could ripple through the office environment. She reviewed the phrasing carefully, rereading each sentence, listening to the quiet voice in her mind that reminded her of the professional boundaries she had fought to maintain. Yet, intertwined with that caution was the ever-present awareness of the magnetic tension that lingered in every interaction with Ethan. She noticed the subtle shift when Ethan glanced up from his tablet, a momentary flicker of attention that lingered just long enough to convey acknowledgement, not critique. Her chest tightened, a familiar mixture of pride, admiration, and suppressed longing. She returned his glance briefly, then allowed herself to focus on her immediate task, reminding herself that professionalism required measured responses, and that the consequences of distraction could be immediate. As the afternoon progressed, the interplay between her responsibilities and the unspoken tension became more pronounced. Victoria balanced multiple priorities, confirming conference calls, aligning financial projections, and ensuring that Ethan's schedule remained uninterrupted. Each step, each decision, was executed with precision, yet her mind remained attuned to the faint signals that suggested vulnerability in him, a small hesitation, a fleeting glance, the subtle exhale after a particularly intense discussion. The office seemed to shift imperceptibly around her. Sounds that would normally fade into background, the hum of computers, the soft chatter of colleagues, the faint whir of air circulation were amplified in her awareness. She moved deliberately, consciously, with every gesture measured yet fluid, aware that the smallest detail could influence the rhythm of Ethan's day. It was a delicate balance, and she felt the weight of it pressing lightly against her chest. And then it happened. A minor miscommunication in a scheduling email caused a brief, unexpected pause in Ethan's response. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else. Yet Victoria felt it acutely. The tension it generated reminded her how finely tuned the balance between professionalism and emotion had become, and how easily a single misstep could disrupt it. Her stomach fluttered, a mixture of apprehension and realization that the dynamics she navigated daily were more complex than they appeared. Victoria exhaled quietly, letting her shoulders relax for a fraction of a moment. She glanced out the window at the city beyond, the fog rolling across the bay, the distant bridge shrouded in gray. In that quiet moment, she sensed a shift approaching, subtle but inevitable. Something was moving in the rhythm of their interactions, a change she could not control, a tension that promised challenges in the hours to come. She straightened her posture, rechecked her notes, and allowed her gaze to meet Ethan's briefly. The faint flicker of his attention, the subtle acknowledgement of her precision and intuition, reinforced both her pride and her awareness of the delicate balance they maintained. The office resumed its rhythm, yet beneath the surface, something had shifted, signaling a tension that neither she nor Ethan could fully articulate. Victoria returned to her desk, the hum of computers and quiet voices settling around her once more. She felt the weight of her responsibilities, the invisible threads connecting her efforts to the smooth operation of the empire, and the unspoken emotional undercurrent that had become impossible to ignore. It was a tension she had learned to navigate, but today it felt more urgent, more pressing, more insistent. She knew, as she typed the next line of her response, that the day was far from over. There would be moments of testing, glimpses of vulnerability, and a series of small, silent interactions that would reveal more than either of them might intend. And in that realization, Victoria felt both anticipation and apprehension. The shift was coming, and she would have to navigate it with all the care, intuition, and emotional awareness she possessed. Victoria senses the shift intensifying and realizes that maintaining professional boundaries is becoming increasingly difficult, foreshadowing an event that will challenge both her restraint and her perception of Ethan. The conference room was a cathedral of glass and polished wood, its long mahogany table reflecting the muted light streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Victoria Lane adjusted her blazer as she stepped inside, her fingertips grazing the smooth surface of the table. Every step echoed lightly against the stone floors, punctuating the quiet tension that had settled over the room. The faint hum of city traffic drifted up from below, mingling with the soft click of her heels. She exhaled slowly, centering herself. Today, more than ever, precision mattered. One misstep could unravel months of meticulous planning. Ethan Caldwell sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, fingers interlaced in front of him. His steel-gray eyes scanned the room, appraising, assessing. The faint crease along his forehead, usually absent, betrayed a rare tension. Victoria felt it immediately, a chill running through her chest. She had seen him under pressure before, yet this was different. There was an edge, a restrained intensity that made every heartbeat feel louder in her own ears. She moved down the side of the table, arranging documents, placing pens strategically, and aligning laptops with a meticulous hand. Each gesture was deliberate, practiced, but her mind raced beyond the mechanical motions. She was calculating, anticipating reactions, reading subtle cues, the twitch of a jaw, the brief glance toward the projector screen, the almost imperceptible tightening of a fist. Each was a signal, a map of the emotions lurking just beneath Ethan's composed exterior. The board members filed in, their faces masks of polite expectation. Victoria noted the subtle dynamics as they settled into their seats, a shift of weight here, an arm crossed there, the occasional raised eyebrow signaling skepticism or impatience. She adjusted the placement of documents silently, ensuring every folder was at arm's reach for Ethan, every note highlighted and easy to reference. Her pulse quickened as the first murmurs of conversation began, the room vibrating with unspoken power dynamics. Ethan began the presentation with calm authority, his voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of controlled urgency. Victoria followed closely, her hands ready to provide materials or notes at a moment's notice. She moved almost invisibly, anticipating needs that had not yet been voiced. Each slight adjustment of a laptop screen, each slide advancement, each subtle gesture was executed with near-perfect synchronization. It was a dance she had learned over years, a choreography of silent understanding between assistant and CEO. Despite her outward composure, Victoria's mind was a whirl of calculations. She monitored Ethan's body language, noting the tiny shifts in posture that indicated fatigue or rising tension. Her thoughts flickered to the moments they had shared quietly over the years, the glance of acknowledgement when she anticipated a complex request, the brief brush of hands when passing documents, the subtle nods that conveyed mutual understanding. These small intimacies were never spoken, yet they were a language all their own. The board members leaned in as Ethan outlined projections, analyzing revenue streams and upcoming acquisitions. The hum of the city outside seemed distant, muted by the charged energy within the room. Victoria's eyes flicked between his hands, the charts, and the reactions of the board, her mind orchestrating the sequence of support he would need. She supplied annotations silently, offered a tablet at just the right moment, and nudged slides forward in perfect rhythm with his verbal cues. Tension built with every passing minute. A faint misalignment in the financial charts could have triggered criticism. A poorly timed answer could have suggested weakness. Victoria's hands moved swiftly yet delicately, correcting, adjusting, anticipating. Her breath was steady, but her awareness of the stakes made her heart hammer just beneath her ribcage. She felt the magnetic pull of the office, the unspoken currents between her and Ethan, a subtle energy that threaded through every gesture, every shared glance. At a critical moment, a board member posed a complex question, one that could have unsettled the flow of the presentation. Victoria anticipated the needed information before Ethan could even formulate a response. She slid a folder across the table, fingers brushing his hand ever so briefly, a contact so light it might have gone unnoticed, yet sufficient to complete the invisible chain of support. Ethan glanced at her, and in that fleeting nod, Victoria caught a rare acknowledgement, a silent affirmation of her precision, her intuition, and her indispensable presence. The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. The board members' skepticism softened, replaced by attentive consideration. Ethan's voice remained calm, yet the slight relaxation of his shoulders betrayed the impact of Victoria's timely intervention. Her chest swelled with a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the awareness of the delicate balance they maintained. The emotional stakes had risen, intensified by the brief recognition they shared, unspoken but profoundly felt. Even as the presentation continued, Victoria's mind cataloged every nuance. She noted Ethan's slight glance in her direction, the way his eyes softened for a heartbeat before returning to the board, the barely perceptible acknowledgement of shared effort. The room's polished surfaces reflected not only the light, but the silent choreography of tension, competence, and emotional undercurrents. As the discussion drew to a close, Victoria allowed herself a measured exhale, though her pulse still thrummed with awareness. Every gesture, every movement, every subtle intervention had reinforced her role as both facilitator and silent confidant. She straightened her posture, smoothed the surface of the table, and stepped back just enough to maintain professional poise while remaining ready for the next move. Ethan concluded the meeting with precise authority, summarizing key points and delineating the next steps with calm confidence. Victoria observed the faint relaxation in his eyes, the subtle lowering of tension across his shoulders. It was a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement of their joint effort. The rare nod he offered her carried a weight beyond words, an affirmation of trust, skill, and silent understanding that left her simultaneously gratified and more aware than ever of the undercurrents between them. The board members departed with courteous nods and polite smiles, leaving the room quieter, yet still charged with residual energy. Victoria allowed herself a brief pause, running her hands lightly over the polished table, savoring the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingering in the corners. The high stakes had been met, yet she sensed the shift beneath the surface, a subtle undercurrent that suggested the emotional balance she had maintained so carefully was about to be tested further. Her gaze drifted to Ethan, who was already reviewing notes for the next engagement, his posture regaining its usual perfection. Yet she had glimpsed a flicker, small, fleeting, but unmistakable. It hinted at the storm lying beneath his composed exterior, a tension that mirrored her own restrained emotions. Victoria's heart tightened, aware that the equilibrium they maintained, so delicately balanced on professionalism and unspoken attraction, was fragile. As she gathered her materials and prepared to move toward the next responsibility, Victoria felt the first inklings of an approaching event, something irreversible, something that would test not only her professional skill, but the boundaries she had worked so hard to maintain. The hum of the city outside, the soft click of her heels, and the polished surfaces of the office seemed to amplify the sense of anticipation. Victoria exhaled quietly, letting the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She was ready for precision, for careful anticipation, for navigating the invisible currents of the boardroom. Yet beneath the surface, she felt the tension building, an emotional undercurrent that promised a shift, one she could neither predict nor fully control. Victoria senses that the next challenge will force an emotional confrontation she cannot avoid, foreshadowing a moment that could irrevocably alter her relationship with Ethan. Victoria Lane's footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor as she made her way to Ethan Caldwell's office. The hallway seemed unusually quiet, the faint hum of air circulation accentuating the weight settling on her chest. She had anticipated being called into his office occasionally, yet the urgency in the assistant's note had set her nerves alight. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the polished floor itself resisted her approach. Her fingers instinctively smoothed the crisp lines of her navy blazer, a futile attempt to maintain composure as her mind raced through countless possibilities. She reached the door and paused, glancing briefly at the city skyline through the glass panel beside the entrance. Sunlight glinted off the adjacent skyscrapers, casting geometric patterns across the floor. In that moment, Victoria felt the dissonance sharply. The brilliance of the day outside contrasted starkly with the storm building inside her. She inhaled deeply, willing her pulse to steady. Anne stepped inside. Ethan sat behind his mahogany desk, the usual immaculate arrangement of papers and digital devices perfectly aligned. Yet today, the perfection felt like a barrier, a rigid shield concealing something beneath. His steel-gray eyes met hers, but the unreadable expression froze her momentarily. There was no greeting, no casual acknowledgement, only the weight of silence, dense and suffocating. Victoria's stomach clenched, her pulse accelerating. She had never seen him like this, never sensed the distance radiating from him so palpably. "Victoria," he said, his voice calm, but carrying a precise, detached tone that made her chest tighten. She stepped forward, heart hammering, aware that every measured step brought her closer to a moment that could reshape everything. The air between them seemed charged, vibrating with unspoken possibilities. The undercurrent of tension she had tried to navigate for years, now threatening to become a chasm. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Victoria lowered herself into it with deliberate care, maintaining a neutral expression even as her internal alarm bells rang. The polished surface of the desk reflected the sunlight, highlighting the subtle shift in his posture, rigid shoulders, interlaced fingers, a jaw set tighter than usual. She recognized the signs. Subtle but undeniable, Ethan was making a decision he had rehearsed internally, one that would ripple far beyond the confines of this office. The words hit her before they were even fully formed. "Victoria, due to corporate restructuring and operational efficiency requirements, your position will be eliminated effective immediately. Time fractured." The sentence echoed in her mind, repeating like a distorted recording. Victoria's chest tightened, a visceral constriction that left her momentarily breathless. She blinked, hoping the words would dissolve if she simply refused to acknowledge them. But they did not. They hung in the air, unyielding, final. She was being dismissed the work of 2 years, the countless sacrifices, the loyalty and precision all rendered irrelevant by a clinical, impersonal decision. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the chair, trembling ever so slightly. Victoria could feel the rapid beat of her heart, the way her muscles tensed with disbelief. Her mind scrambled for explanations, for reasons beyond the corporate jargon that had been delivered so smoothly, so without empathy. She remembered the late nights, the moments she had anticipated Ethan's needs before he even voiced them, the personal sacrifices she had made to ensure the flawless operation of his empire. All of it seemed suddenly fragile, ephemeral, inconsequential. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on her, professional, controlled, yet she detected a flicker beneath the surface, something restrained, a trace of conflict he refused to reveal. She noticed it in the slight hesitation before he continued, in the imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth. Yet even that could not soften the blow. The office, for all its glass and polished surfaces, now felt cold, unwelcoming, a sterile stage upon which her career had been dismantled with measured efficiency. Victoria's internal turmoil surged. Devastation, disbelief, and fear of the unknown collided within her. She fought to maintain a composed exterior, aligning her posture, smoothing her hands over her lap. Yet her mind raced with fragmented thoughts. What next? How could she navigate this sudden void, this rupture in her carefully constructed life? The city outside continued its indifferent hum, unaware of the personal upheaval occurring within this glass-enclosed office. The human resources representative, poised and professional, handed her the severance documentation. Victoria's eyes skimmed the generous offer of 6 months' salary, benefits continuation, and a positive reference. Each line felt like both a consolation and a reminder of the stark reality she was now untethered, cast adrift from the life she had meticulously built. She traced the corporate letterhead lightly with her fingertip, as though the material itself might convey the solidity of her past efforts, but it did not. With her professional future suddenly uncertain, Victoria's mind flickered to personal concerns she had yet to articulate, to thoughts she had held in careful balance beneath the surface of competence. It was then that a revelation emerged, unexpected and profound. A test she had taken days earlier, before the upheaval, had confirmed a life-altering truth: she was pregnant. The juxtaposition struck her like lightning. The professional loss, the abrupt termination, collided with the intimate, unchangeable fact growing quietly within her body. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The knowledge was at once exhilarating and terrifying. She placed her hand gently on her abdomen, feeling a subtle warmth, a fragile connection to something entirely her own. In that instant, the stakes had multiplied exponentially, not only for her career, but for her life, her heart, and the life she carried. A tide of moral conflict rose within her. How could she reconcile the loss of her professional identity with the sudden, profound responsibility of impending motherhood? How could she navigate a world that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet, where her loyalty and dedication had been rendered moot? Yet the future demanded courage and deliberation. Every instinct she had cultivated for precision and foresight seemed inadequate in the face of this personal revelation. Victoria remained seated, absorbing the full weight of her circumstances. The sunlight glinted off the desk, highlighting the careful alignment of pens, papers, and screens, a meticulous order that now felt almost cruelly ironic. Her mind traced every moment of sacrifice, every late night, every subtle gesture of understanding shared with Ethan, and she realized that these 2 years had prepared her not for ease, but for the resilience she would need now. Even as the initial shock ebbed slightly, the internal storm persisted. Victoria thought of the delicate balance she had maintained with Ethan, the unspoken understanding, the silent currents of emotion beneath professional interactions. She recognized that this revelation, this new, unalterable reality, would challenge her in ways beyond anything she had encountered before. Yet, beneath the fear, a thread of resolve began to form. She would navigate this, she decided, with the same meticulous care and unwavering intuition that had defined her professional life. Victoria must now confront the reality of her pregnancy while managing lingering feelings for Ethan, setting the stage for a confrontation that could redefine both their futures. Victoria Lane sat cross-legged on the edge of her modest San Francisco apartment bed, the early evening light filtering through the sheer curtains. The room was quiet except for the occasional hum of traffic outside. She traced the edges of the termination letter with a fingertip, the crisp paper cool against her skin. Each word she had read hours ago still resonated in her mind like a harsh echo. Despite the generous severance, the reality of losing her role, her routine, her place in Ethan Caldwell's world, weighed heavily on her chest. The apartment around her was small but orderly, a reflection of the careful life she had carved out on her own. Shelves lined with books she loved, framed photographs of family vacations, a kitchen with neatly stacked dishes, and a well-worn leather chair by the window. Each detail spoke of independence and self-reliance. Yet tonight, the apartment felt too silent, too still, as though the walls themselves mourned the loss she now carried inside her. She shifted to the couch, laying the letter beside her. Her hand instinctively moved to the subtle curve of her abdomen, the first tangible sign of the life growing within her. A gentle pressure, a quiet warmth, contrasted sharply with the cold sting of corporate rejection. Her breaths came shallow and uneven as she tried to reconcile the two realities: the sudden professional void and the intimate, irrevocable change that the pregnancy represented. Victoria reflected on the past weeks with a bittersweet clarity. The small moments she had shared with Ethan, the subtle gestures, the shared glances, the quiet understanding of moods and needs flashed through her mind. Those memories were at once comforting and torturous. She had been indispensable to him, a trusted presence in his meticulously ordered world, and yet all of it had been discarded with a single, impersonal announcement. The thought of Ethan stirred a complex mixture of emotions, frustration, sadness, lingering affection. She remembered his rigid composure during board meetings, the rare glimpses of vulnerability she had caught, and the way he had looked at her on the private jet, just for a fleeting moment. The awareness that he now faced the consequences of his own decisions, his panic, his regret added layers of tension to her already stormy thoughts. She moved to the small kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sipped slowly, letting the cool liquid slide down her throat. Her gaze lingered on the simple details of daily life, the stacked mugs, the bowl of fresh fruit on the counter, the faint scent of lavender from a small candle she had lit earlier. Each element seemed trivial in the larger scheme of the upheaval she faced, yet they grounded her, reminding her of her autonomy and resilience. Victoria thought about the uncertainty ahead. How would she manage this pregnancy alone? How would she navigate a world that had abruptly shifted beneath her feet? Fear and hope intertwined, tugging at her heart with equal force. She allowed herself a brief moment of vulnerability, acknowledging the tears that had pricked her eyes but had yet to fall. These were not tears of defeat, but of profound transition, signaling the immense emotional stakes she now faced. Meanwhile, miles away, Ethan Caldwell was grappling with his own sense of urgency. He sat in his office, staring at the empty space on the calendar where Victoria's name had once appeared. Panic gnawed at the edges of his calculated mind. The private investigator he had commissioned was compiling leads, and every failed call, every unreturned message intensified the knot of anxiety in his chest. He realized, with a sinking clarity, that he had dismissed the one person who understood his rhythms, who had anticipated his every need, who now also carried the most personal consequence of their brief, complicated connection. Victoria paced her living room, fingers brushing over the edge of the couch, the soft fabric grounding her as she wrestled with internal dialogue. Thoughts bounced in rapid succession. The financial implications, the career trajectory she had worked so hard to establish, the potential challenges of single parenthood, and the memories of Ethan's rare, unguarded moments. Each reflection carried weight, some comforting, others piercingly painful. She settled on the couch again, cradling her abdomen with both hands. Her pulse had slowed slightly, but the emotional currents continued to surge beneath the surface. The realization that this life, growing quietly within her, was entwined with a man who had both devastated and captivated her, added layers of complexity she could not yet fully untangle. She was aware of her own strength, yet she could not ignore the deep well of uncertainty. As the evening progressed, Victoria allowed herself to plan in fragments: meals, doctor appointments, work opportunities she might pursue independently. Each thought was deliberate, methodical, an effort to impose structure on chaos. Yet, beneath the practical considerations, her mind repeatedly drifted back to Ethan. She imagined his expression upon realizing the weight of her pregnancy, the flicker of emotion that might break through his composed exterior. Would he seek to make amends? Would he understand the enormity of what she now faced alone? The sense of anticipation mingled with fear, creating a taut, almost unbearable tension. Every notification ping on her phone made her heart leap, only to settle with disappointment when it was not him. Her thoughts circled relentlessly, analyzing every possibility, every potential outcome. Yet she could not predict the course of the unfolding narrative. By late evening, the apartment felt smaller, cozier, yet constricting. Victoria sank into the leather chair by the window, tracing the contours of her surroundings while the city lights blinked in the distance. She allowed herself a quiet sigh, acknowledging both her fear and her determination. Despite the upheaval, she was resolute she would face this challenge, nurture the life she carried, and navigate the consequences with intelligence and courage. Meanwhile, Ethan had begun a methodical, almost frantic search. Calls were made, leads were followed, clinics contacted, and friends quietly questioned. His typically precise mind now wrestled with raw emotion, the fear of having lost control of the most significant outcome of his life. He realized that finding Victoria was no longer just a matter of logistics, it was a matter of heart, of responsibility, and of reckoning with choices that could not be undone. Victoria's gaze fell to a small framed photograph on the mantel, a reminder of her independent path, the life she had built alone. Yet now, intertwined with that independence, was the realization that her future could no longer be planned in isolation. The convergence of professional loss, personal responsibility, and lingering emotional attachment created a labyrinth of choices she would need to navigate carefully. She allowed herself one more moment of reflection, pressing her palm gently against her abdomen, feeling the subtle warmth, the delicate life she now held. The duality of despair and hope coexisted within her chest, a paradox she would carry forward as she prepared for the days ahead. Ethan's search intensifies, and Victoria will soon face a confrontation that could change everything between them, testing trust, vulnerability, and the potential for reconciliation. The rain had begun in a steady drizzle, transforming into a downpour that streaked the streets of San Francisco with silver rivulets. Victoria Lane clutched her navy umbrella tightly, the fabric sagging slightly under the weight of relentless droplets. She stepped cautiously across the slick sidewalk, mindful of puddles and the slippery sheen beneath her heels. Her apartment keys jingled softly in her hand, a minor accompaniment to the steady rhythm of the rain. Each breath she drew was tinged with the crisp scent of wet asphalt and the faint aroma of eucalyptus from nearby planters. Victoria's thoughts raced. She was aware, more than ever, of the vulnerability the rain accentuated, the dampness seeping into her clothes, the chill that made her shiver, the isolation of walking alone despite the city bustling beyond her immediate space. Her hand instinctively rested over her abdomen, a subconscious shield for the tiny life growing within her. Every step felt measured, deliberate, protective. Her heart beat faster not from exertion, but from the underlying tension that had been building for weeks. Ethan Caldwell's figure emerged through the blur of rain, slightly obscured by the downpour. He had parked a few blocks away, abandoning his usual vehicle for the sake of discretion, and now stood watching the clinic's glass doors with an intensity that made Victoria's chest constrict even before he approached. His usual impeccably tailored suit was dampened by rain, the dark fabric clinging slightly to his frame. Hair plastered against his forehead, he looked both formidable and vulnerable, a juxtaposition Victoria found herself unable to ignore. Victoria hesitated as she stepped onto the curb. She sensed something was off. The unusual stillness in the air around her, unusual even in the midst of the rainstorm. Her grip on the umbrella tightened, knuckles whitening, while her mind scrolled rapidly through potential exit strategies, rationalizing every possible escape route. Yet, before she could make a decisive move, she caught sight of his eyes steel gray, searching, urgent. Ethan moved closer, boots splashing through shallow puddles, hands partially raised as though to indicate peace, concern, and desperation all at once. The sound of the rain seemed to amplify the tension between them, each drop a metronome for the unspoken emotions that had been accumulating for weeks. Victoria froze mid-step, the umbrella trembling slightly in her hand. She felt an internal tug-of-war, the instinct to protect herself and the baby, versus the lingering, complicated affection she still harbored for the man before her. Her mind drifted briefly to the termination letter, still neatly stored in a drawer back at her apartment. The crisp edges, the sterile language, the stark finality. It was a reminder that he had once discarded her world with a single, unemotional decision. And yet, here he was, dripping rainwater onto the pavement, vulnerability bleeding through his usual corporate armor. The dissonance between professional ruthlessness and human fragility left her conflicted, wary, and uncertain. Ethan stopped a few feet away, the distance deliberate, respecting boundaries yet closing the physical and emotional gap simultaneously. His breathing was steady, controlled, but his eyes betrayed the turmoil beneath, the panic of the past days, the frantic search, the regret all played out in the intensity of his gaze. Victoria felt a knot tighten in her stomach, her heart quickening as she realized the gravity of the moment. This was not merely a meeting, It was a collision of past mistakes, lingering attraction, and new, uncharted responsibility. The rain plastered strands of Victoria's dark hair against her forehead. She brushed them back absent-mindedly, feeling the dampness against her skin, a reminder of how exposed she was, not just physically, but emotionally. Every instinct screamed caution, yet her feet remained rooted, unable to retreat despite the flood of apprehension that coursed through her. She could feel the baby stir slightly, a gentle, grounding reminder that the stakes were higher than her personal discomfort. Ethan's voice finally broke the silence, low but carrying a tremor that betrayed his internal panic. "Victoria," he began, careful not to rush, not to overwhelm. Yet the urgency of the syllable alone made her heart skip. She did not respond, merely tightening her hold on the umbrella, aware of the tension coiling between them, like a spring waiting to release. He took another step forward, cautious but deliberate, and Victoria's pulse accelerated, each heartbeat a loud echo in the charged atmosphere. The sensory details of the scene heightened their confrontation, the rain sluicing down their coats, the reflective puddles capturing fragments of their images, the occasional splash of a passing car, the muted city noises softened by the water's patter. Every element conspired to draw focus inward, onto the emotions, the words unspoken, the years of intertwined history compressed into this single encounter. Victoria's mind flicked between past and present. She recalled the quiet, almost imperceptible moments they had shared, the glances, the gestures, the understanding she had cultivated by studying his moods and needs. Those moments now seemed both precious and perilous, reminding her that the man before her, despite his flaws, had once trusted her implicitly, and now he stood dripping in rainwater, evidence of desperation and an undeniable longing she could neither deny nor fully embrace. The climax approached as Ethan closed the remaining distance, their eyes locked, unguarded and searching, revealing layers of unspoken feelings, fear, guilt, hope, desire, and regret. Victoria felt the surge of emotion crash over her, a tidal wave threatening to sweep her off her carefully maintained equilibrium. The baby's quiet presence inside her acted as both anchor and amplifier, intensifying the emotional stakes. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain fell relentlessly, drumming against umbrellas, coats, and pavement. Each of them measured the other, aware that the slightest word, the smallest gesture, could alter the trajectory of their connection forever. The confrontation, charged with weeks of unresolved tension and the added complication of new life, had reached its zenith. Victoria finally exhaled, a small, almost imperceptible release of breath, acknowledging both the gravity and the inevitability of the moment. Ethan mirrored her movement, subtle but deliberate, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared history, their intertwined emotions, and the challenges still ahead. The emotional collision forces both Victoria and Ethan to confront their feelings, vulnerabilities, and the responsibility the pregnancy imposes, setting up a delicate path toward reconciliation or heartbreak. Victoria Lane closed the door to her San Francisco apartment with a soft click, the muted sound punctuating the quiet tension that had settled over the room. Rain still pattered lightly against the window pane, droplets gliding down the glass in thin, sinuous streams. She rested her hands on her hips for a moment, drawing a steadying breath. The confrontation with Ethan earlier had left her both shaken and resolute. The baby she carried, fragile and new, demanded a clarity she could no longer afford to compromise. Ethan Caldwell stood in the entryway, a hand slightly raised as though to signal reassurance, his damp coat clinging to his frame. His eyes were locked on hers, earnest and raw, the usual calculated composure softened into something approachable, almost human. Yet Victoria's gaze remained steady, measured, a deliberate barrier to the tide of emotion threatening to overwhelm her. The apartment around them reflected Victoria's careful attention to everyday life, the small kitchen with its neatly stacked dishes, a basket of fresh fruit on the counter, and a well-worn leather chair positioned for reading by the window. Everything spoke of her independence and practicality, Even the faint aroma of brewed herbal tea that lingered from earlier suggested routine and self-care, a reminder that she could and would manage life on her own terms. Victoria gestured toward the couch, her hand brushing against the soft fabric in a deliberate, grounding motion. "Ethan," she said softly but firmly, "this is my life now, my responsibility. I need to make the decisions, not you." Her voice carried both vulnerability and authority, an assertion of boundaries that she had spent weeks preparing to articulate. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, his eyes darkening with unspoken regret. He wanted to interrupt, to offer solutions, to assert his presence in ways she would normally welcome, but he recognized the firmness in her tone and the subtle tension in her posture. Instead, he nodded slowly, the barest acknowledgement of her autonomy. He understood, at least partially, that trust had been fractured and that any steps forward required patience and respect. The silence between them was punctuated by the small, almost mundane sounds of domestic life, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of traffic, the occasional drip from the windowsill. Each ordinary sound contrasted sharply with the extraordinary stakes of their reunion, emphasizing the delicate balance between normalcy and upheaval. Victoria moved to the small kitchen counter, her fingers brushing over the smooth surface as she poured herself a cup of water. Her actions were deliberate, precise, a reflection of her need for control amid emotional chaos. Ethan remained near the doorway, his hands lightly clasped in front of him, observing, without encroaching, a silent commitment to respecting her space while still being present. As she sipped the water, Victoria allowed herself a brief reflection on the past weeks, the termination, the discovery of her pregnancy. The rain-soaked confrontation all had crystallized a series of decisions that could no longer be delayed. She acknowledged the fear she felt, fear of vulnerability, fear of dependence, fear of the unknown. Yet within that fear was a quiet determination to navigate her life and her pregnancy on her own terms. Asserting her independence while cautiously measuring the gestures of support from Ethan, meanwhile, had quietly taken steps to support her without overstepping. He had arranged prenatal care discreetly, ensuring that appointments were scheduled with highly respected professionals, the kind whose reputations spoke for themselves. He had coordinated behind the scenes, respecting her autonomy while attending to the needs of the life she carried. Every detail he managed was calculated to assist without intruding, a delicate balance of care and restraint that he hoped would demonstrate both responsibility and respect. Victoria noticed subtle signs of his efforts, the neatly printed appointment reminders left on the kitchen counter, the careful selection of a reputable obstetrician, the absence of any intrusive questioning or assumptions. She recognized the thoughtfulness behind these gestures, and a small, cautious warmth began to counter the lingering wariness she had felt since the confrontation. Yet, she did not allow herself to fully embrace this warmth. The boundaries she had set were deliberate, necessary for the protection of both herself and the child. Her mind flickered to the potential emotional pitfalls, the risk of dependency, the possibility of disappointment, the fear that past behaviors might repeat themselves. Each consideration reinforced the importance of measured engagement, of cautious acknowledgement rather than surrender. Victoria's eyes scanned the room again, taking in the familiar details that symbolized stability and independence. She adjusted a small throw pillow on the couch, a minor act of control that grounded her amidst the complex emotions swirling within. Her gaze lingered on the baby's nursery items. She had begun organizing a small, handcrafted crib, neatly folded blankets, and soft toys arranged with care. These preparations were both a tangible manifestation of responsibility and a quiet assertion of her ability to manage life on her own terms. Ethan stepped slightly closer, mindful of distance, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. He spoke softly. "Victoria, I just want to be here for you, for the baby, whatever you need, whenever you need it." His voice carried the weight of regret, responsibility, and genuine concern. Yet he respected the firmness of her stance, allowing her the space to assert her boundaries without pressure or insistence. Victoria's fingers tightened slightly around her water glass, a small, physical acknowledgement of the tension coursing through her. She appreciated the sincerity in his tone, but she also recognized that trust could not be rebuilt through words alone. Actions, consistent and unobtrusive, would speak louder than any confession or apology. She allowed herself to consider this quietly, acknowledging the beginnings of a fragile, cautious respect for the care he had taken. The apartment's soft lighting highlighted the contours of the room and their figures within it. Shadows played across walls and furniture, accentuating the delicate balance of tension and tentative connection. Each movement, each gesture carried weight, a shift of weight, a nod, a subtle adjustment of posture. The silent choreography of presence and restraint mirrored the emotional negotiation unfolding between them. Victoria finally spoke, her tone steady yet tinged with vulnerability. "I see that you're trying. Ethan, I see it. But this isn't about guilt or obligation or trying to fix something that's already broken. It's about showing up without overstepping, without expecting anything in return. Can you do that?" Ethan's eyes softened, and he nodded, the faintest exhale escaping him. He understood that this was the first step toward rebuilding trust, not grand gestures, not declarations, but quiet, consistent presence and respect for her autonomy. The moment, though small in action, carried immense emotional weight, signaling the beginning of a tentative reconciliation built on mutual respect and understanding. Victoria will begin to observe Ethan's consistent care and presence, testing the boundaries of trust while navigating her pregnancy, setting the stage for deeper emotional intimacy and potential reconciliation. Victoria Lane returned from her prenatal yoga class, her steps light but measured, carrying a small tote bag of groceries. The late afternoon sun filtered weakly through the San Francisco clouds, painting the apartment walls with soft streaks of gold. As she set her bag down on the counter, she noticed a neatly wrapped box sitting beside it, labeled simply with her name in precise, elegant handwriting. Her fingers hesitated over the paper, a mixture of curiosity and guarded caution, keeping her from immediately opening it. Victoria had spent weeks maintaining a delicate balance between independence and necessity, asserting boundaries while navigating the complex dynamics of her relationship with Ethan Caldwell. Yet, here was evidence that he had quietly respected those boundaries, contributing care without intrusion. She unwrapped the box carefully, revealing an assortment of items: organic teas, individually wrapped crackers, a jar of prenatal vitamins she had mentioned in passing, and a small, hardcover book titled Expecting with Confidence. Dozens of sticky notes marked pages she would likely reference over the coming months. The thoughtfulness of each item, the attention to detail, struck her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her chest warmed, yet her expression remained neutral, as if testing whether this care was consistent or merely performative. Victoria moved to the kitchen, placing the items on the counter and arranging them with the precision that had long defined her professional life. Each package became a subtle measure of Ethan's effort, the teas carefully chosen, the crackers aligned for convenience, the prenatal book annotated with insights she knew he had painstakingly studied. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile, realizing that he had not merely provided for her needs, but had considered her comfort and autonomy in doing so. Over the next few days, Ethan's acts of care continued in quiet, deliberate ways. Morning coffee appeared exactly as she preferred, measured for strength, slightly sweetened, and served with a neatly folded note suggesting stretches or relaxation techniques for pregnancy. Victoria observed these gestures with cautious optimism, noting the consistency without allowing herself to fully rely on them. She acknowledged his presence, yet kept an emotional distance, testing whether his attentiveness was sustained or fleeting. The apartment became a subtle stage for these ongoing efforts. Books were left in plain sight with helpful annotations. Small snacks and water bottles were strategically placed near her usual seating areas. Victoria noticed the meticulous care he had taken in arranging these details. each one a silent message of support and respect. The combination of thoughtfulness and restraint slowly chipped away at her skepticism, prompting her to consider the possibility that Ethan's intentions were genuine. Victoria spent hours reflecting on the gestures, moving items slightly, sipping tea, reading annotations, and allowing herself to feel the quiet reassurance embedded in each act. She compared these moments to previous experiences, the abrupt dismissal, the chaos that had followed, the weeks of solitude navigating the first signs of her pregnancy. The contrast was stark, and though she remained guarded, the realization that his care was consistent rather than performative began to dawn. Ethan himself observed from a distance, careful not to impose, yet fully aware of each reaction. He adjusted his approach subtly based on her responses. If she lingered over the prenatal book, he would leave another note the following day with additional insights. If she enjoyed the tea, he would replenish it with the same attention to detail. There was no need for overt declarations of love or apologies. The quiet consistency of these gestures spoke louder than words ever could. Victoria caught herself noticing these efforts in unexpected moments. A neatly folded blanket placed on the couch for comfort, a thoughtfully positioned chair by the window to catch the morning light, even a small bag of apples her favorite left near the counter. Each act was deliberate, considerate, and yet unobtrusive, allowing her to maintain agency over her life while recognizing the care Ethan provided. The gradual softening of her skepticism was not instantaneous, nor was it dramatic. It was measured, internal, and reflective. Victoria spent quiet evenings examining his notes, sipping tea, and thinking through the implications of his consistent attention. She acknowledged, reluctantly at first, that these were not performative gestures meant to impress or manipulate. They were actions rooted in responsibility, affection, and a genuine desire to support her and the child. Her internal dialogue oscillated between cautious optimism and protective restraint. She considered the vulnerability inherent in allowing herself to trust again, the risks of relying on someone who had previously caused her pain. Yet, the authenticity of Ethan's care, the meticulous attention to detail, and the unwavering respect for her boundaries forced her to reconsider the rigidity she had imposed on her heart. The climactic moment of realization came quietly one morning. Victoria was arranging items for her next doctor's appointment when she paused. Glancing at the notes Ethan had left alongside the prenatal book, they were precise, thoughtful, and completely aligned with her needs and preferences. No grand gestures, no pressure, no assumptions, only consistent, deliberate care. She exhaled, a slow release of tension, acknowledging that this was the kind of support she had been searching for, one that did not compromise her independence. Victoria's gaze lingered on the notes, her hand resting lightly on her abdomen, feeling the subtle movements of the baby within. For the first time since the termination and the weeks of solitude that had followed, she allowed herself to feel a small measure of hope. Ethan's presence, expressed through actions rather than words, had begun to build a bridge of trust, a bridge she could cautiously approach, but not yet fully cross. The apartment felt warmer, safer, and imbued with the quiet evidence of his commitment. Victoria realized that the gestures were not isolated. They were part of a consistent pattern, demonstrating care without obligation, presence without intrusion. The small acts, groceries, tea, notes, prenatal books had become the tangible proof of his transformation, his dedication to supporting her and the child responsibly. Even so, she maintained her boundaries. Victoria knew that emotional reconciliation would require time, patience, and continued consistency. She did not yet allow herself to fully lean into the care he provided, but she acknowledged it, appreciated it, and began to adjust her expectations of what he could offer without compromising her own autonomy. Victoria's cautious acknowledgement of Ethan's consistent care sets the stage for deeper emotional vulnerability, where honesty and trust will be tested as they navigate impending challenges together. The mornings in Victoria Lane's apartment had begun to settle into a quiet rhythm. Sunlight spilled through the partially drawn curtains, warming the hardwood floors and catching the edges of the small, organized nursery corner she had begun preparing. Ethan Caldwell moved about the space with a deliberate ease, balancing his work responsibilities with thoughtful gestures designed to support Victoria and the baby. Breakfast had become a shared affair, not formal or rigid, but simple and consistent. Freshly brewed coffee, slightly weaker than his usual preference, sat beside Victoria's herbal tea. Plates of oatmeal, topped with fruit and a light drizzle of honey, rested between them. Ethan had learned her subtle preferences, how she liked her yogurt mixed, which fruits she favored for morning snacks, even how she folded the napkin beside her plate. Each detail spoke of attention, care, and an understanding that went beyond words. Victoria noticed, quietly observing as he moved about the kitchen. He hummed softly while preparing breakfast, a rare sound that softened the edges of his usual composed, businesslike demeanor. She found herself smiling, a fleeting lift of the lips as the familiar rhythm of routine began to soothe her lingering anxieties. Her heart, which had been guarded for weeks, began to register small pulses of trust. Ethan's work had not paused. Laptops and phones were present, reminders of the empire he managed. Yet, he navigated calls and emails with a new rhythm, pausing at intervals to check on Victoria, to ensure her comfort, to notice if she needed an extra pillow or a glass of water. It was not perfection he sought to display, but presence and consideration. And in that, Victoria recognized a growing authenticity she had not expected. The afternoon appointments were similarly coordinated. Dr. Miranda Kellerman, an experienced obstetrician, now had a precise schedule that accommodated Victoria's comfort and allowed Ethan to participate without overwhelming her. He remained nearby, sometimes in the waiting room, sometimes quietly flipping through a pregnancy guide, making notes he might never share but used to understand and anticipate her needs. Victoria found herself glancing at him during these moments, noting the careful concentration and the way his brow furrowed in thought, a gentleness tempered by his natural intensity. In the quiet hours at home, Victoria organized baby clothes and supplies, her fingers tracing the soft cotton and tiny seams. Ethan hovered nearby, often quietly assisting or simply making space for her to move freely. He asked thoughtful questions about items, not from curiosity alone, but to ensure that he understood her choices and respected her preferences. Each exchange, mundane as it might seem, reinforced the sense of partnership slowly building between them. Laughter began to creep into their routines, subtle and understated, the kind that did not need loud declarations to resonate. A small mishap with a spilled bottle of juice became a shared joke. A question about assembly instructions for a crib led to an afternoon of light teasing and careful collaboration. These moments, brief yet rich with connection, threaded a sense of normalcy into the otherwise high-stakes emotional landscape they navigated. Victoria found herself reflecting often on her previous fears, the termination, the weeks of isolation, the uncertainty that had filled her days. Yet, in observing Ethan's consistent, considerate behavior, she felt a tentative softening of those anxieties. The care he displayed was not dramatic or overwhelming. It was steady, reliable, and profoundly human. She began to sense that trust could be rebuilt, not instantly, but incrementally, through tangible actions rather than words alone. Ethan, too, noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor, the slight relaxation of her shoulders, the small smiles that appeared without prompting, the way she allowed him to carry or set down heavier items. Each observation reinforced his awareness of the delicate balance between showing care and respecting boundaries. He did not push, did not overstep. Instead, he let his actions speak, allowing Victoria the space to choose when and how to engage with him. The apartment itself became a canvas for their evolving connection. Victoria's meticulous organization of supplies, paired with Ethan's thoughtful contributions, created a space that felt both safe and nurturing. Small touches like a cushion placed where she often sat, a fresh pot of tea left beside her while she read, or the quiet presence of his notes accumulated into an unspoken dialogue of care. She began to recognize the consistency behind these gestures, the reliability that suggested he was invested not in control, but in support. Evenings often found them in shared silence, reading or reviewing plans for the nursery. Victoria would fold tiny clothes or arrange toys while Ethan quietly worked nearby, sometimes offering insights or quietly affirming her choices. The comfort of routine, the predictability of these shared tasks, and the lack of pressure to perform emotionally created a fertile ground for trust to grow. A particularly tender moment came one evening as Victoria traced her hand over the small blanket she had chosen for the crib. Ethan approached slowly, a cup of ginger tea in hand, and placed it beside her without a word. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of the past week's determination, the confrontation, the emotional walls felt suspended. There was no declaration, no dramatic gesture, only quiet recognition of shared responsibility and emerging connection. Victoria allowed herself a subtle nod of acknowledgement, a small acceptance that he was present, genuine, and trustworthy. The sense of hope that permeated the apartment that evening was fragile yet undeniable. Victoria recognized that the journey ahead was still long, and the boundaries she had established would remain essential. Yet, for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she allowed herself to feel the possibility that reconciliation, nurtured through consistent, thoughtful care, could lead to a partnership grounded in respect, trust, and shared purpose. As the pregnancy progresses and their routines solidify, Victoria and Ethan face the first true test of their renewed bond, a challenge that will require honesty, vulnerability, and shared decision-making. The soft glow of the late afternoon sun filtered through the bedroom windows, casting a warm, golden hue across Victoria Lane's apartment. She moved slowly, carrying folded baby clothes from the laundry basket to the nursery, each garment a tiny promise of the life soon to arrive. The space had transformed over the past weeks into a haven of preparation, a crib positioned to catch the morning light, shelves carefully arranged with soft toys, and a small rocking chair placed strategically near the window. Every detail reflected Victoria's meticulous nature and her desire to create a safe, comforting environment for her child. Ethan Caldwell hovered nearby, quietly attentive, offering support without intrusion. He had taken to preparing snacks, refilling water, and arranging small comforts for Victoria as she navigated the final weeks of her pregnancy. There was a gentle rhythm to his presence, not demanding, not overbearing, simply there to assist and observe, adjusting his actions based on her unspoken cues. Each gesture, no matter how minor, underscored his commitment and growing understanding of her needs. Victoria paused at the crib, smoothing the blanket she had folded with care. Her fingers lingered on the soft fabric, and she traced her hand across the tiny folds, imagining the baby wrapped snugly inside. A quiet wave of gratitude washed over her, mingled with the lingering apprehension of what lay ahead. She could feel the weight of responsibility, the life she would soon nurture, and the delicate balance of managing her own health while preparing to welcome another human being into the world. Ethan stepped closer, setting a small bag of organic snacks on the counter. His movements were deliberate, respectful, and yet imbued with a quiet reassurance. He had learned over the weeks that patience was essential, that Victoria's emotional state required space, consistency, and understanding. He had adjusted his own expectations, balancing the demands of his tech empire with the intimate responsibilities of impending parenthood. The transformation was subtle but profound, a shift from control to attentive support. The day moved on with small, meaningful tasks. Victoria and Ethan folded clothes, arranged diapers and wipes, and reviewed lists of items that would soon be essential. Each interaction carried significance, her gestures measured and thoughtful, his responses patient and attentive. Conversation was minimal, but laden with nuance, the kind of communication that required neither grand declarations nor overt displays of affection. In this quiet but shared labor, trust and connection were being reinforced, brick by brick, through consistency and consideration. Moments of reflection came frequently. Victoria thought back to the weeks of upheaval, the termination, the solitude, the discovery of her pregnancy. She remembered the fear that had initially gripped her, the uncertainty of facing this journey alone. Yet, observing Ethan's unwavering presence now, she recognized a profound shift. Actions had replaced words, consistency had replaced uncertainty, and patience had replaced fear. The foundation of trust she had so carefully guarded was being rebuilt through tangible care. Ethan, too, allowed himself moments of reflection. He considered the mistakes of the past, the rash decisions that had led to Victoria's departure, and the weight of the emotional distance he had imposed. His current actions were deliberate, corrective, and attentive, yet they were also infused with a vulnerability he had rarely allowed himself to show. Being present for Victoria, understanding her needs without imposing his own, had become a measure of his growth and a silent commitment to both her and the baby. The afternoon brought a small pre-birth scare. Victoria felt an unexpected cramp, sharp and sudden, that sent her hand instinctively to her abdomen. Her breath hitched, and a tremor ran through her frame as concern rose in her chest. Ethan reacted immediately, his calm authority tempered with visible worry. He guided her to the couch, offering a blanket and a glass of water, asking gentle, measured questions to assess her condition. There was no panic, only focused attention and the readiness to act if needed. Victoria's initial fear slowly gave way to trust, reinforced by his consistent response. The scare, though minor and ultimately harmless, highlighted their interdependence and the necessity of vulnerability in this new chapter. She realized that allowing herself to lean on Ethan did not diminish her strength. Instead, it was an acknowledgement of shared responsibility, an integration of care and reliance that would form the basis of their family unit. Even as the adrenaline of the moment faded, the intensity of connection lingered. Victoria felt the weight of impending motherhood, tempered by the support of a partner who had learned to balance attentiveness with respect for her autonomy. She traced her fingers over the edge of the blanket again, imagining the tiny body it would soon envelop, and felt a surge of gratitude and cautious hope. Preparations continued quietly into the evening. The nursery was inspected one last time, small adjustments made, everything arranged with both functionality and tenderness in mind. Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point, the tension, the mistakes, the near misses, and the slow rebuilding of trust. Each step had been deliberate, filled with struggle and growth, culminating in a space ready to welcome new life. Ethan joined her in the nursery, leaning against the doorway with a gentle presence. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic proclamation. Instead, he offered a supportive smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared effort, and the unspoken promise that he would be present for every step to come. Victoria felt the subtle reassurance, the tangible proof of reliability, and allowed herself a moment to inhale deeply, centering herself in the calm after weeks of uncertainty. The evening concluded with a quiet dinner, shared without hurry, their conversation light but infused with shared anticipation. Victoria allowed herself a few moments of laughter, appreciating the small absurdities of preparation, the misplaced items, the minor frustrations of organizing the apartment. Ethan joined in, his laughter low and genuine, harmonizing with hers in a way that reinforced the emotional bridge forming between them. As night fell, Victoria sat in the nursery, placing a tiny sock beside the crib and smoothing the soft sheets over the mattress. She looked around at the carefully arranged space, feeling a profound mix of apprehension, excitement, and gratitude. The small pre-birth scare lingered as a reminder of fragility, but also of resilience and the necessity of trust. She glanced toward Ethan, who was quietly reviewing notes at the desk, and felt the quiet affirmation of their evolving connection, shared responsibility, mutual respect, and the promise of unwavering support. The long-awaited birth approaches, bringing with it the culmination of their emotional journey, the resolution of trust, and the joy of welcoming new life into a family forged through challenge, care, and shared growth. Victoria Lane stood by the large window of her San Francisco apartment, her hand gently resting on the curve of her belly. The city stretched below, a vast network of streets, rooftops, and twinkling lights that shimmered as dusk settled over the skyline, the hum of distant traffic, the occasional honk, and the subtle scent of rain in the cool evening air created a familiar, grounding rhythm. She inhaled slowly, letting the mixture of anticipation, relief, and quiet joy settle into her chest. Her journey to this point had been anything but simple. She reflected on the months of turmoil, the emotional upheaval, and the uncertain path that had brought her to this moment. The termination, the solitary days of managing early pregnancy, the confrontation in the rain-soaked streets, and the painstaking rebuilding of trust, all of it had carved lessons into her heart. Lessons about courage, resilience, and the delicate balance between vulnerability and self-preservation. Ethan Caldwell moved quietly in the background, arranging a small stack of prenatal books on the coffee table. He had learned over the weeks that patience was not passive, it was active, requiring careful attention, quiet understanding, and consistent action. Each gesture, no matter how small, spoke volumes, ensuring Victoria's comfort, anticipating needs without imposition, and showing a steadfast presence that had been absent in earlier chapters of their story. Victoria watched him, noting the soft lines around his eyes, the subtle attentiveness in the way he handled the books, and the calm composure he carried now, tempered by vulnerability and openness. The man who had once been a fortress of precision and control had softened not in weakness, but in the quiet strength of care. She felt a warmth in her chest, a mix of admiration, gratitude, and tentative affection, recognizing that their bond had deepened into something rare and genuine. She traced her fingers along the windowsill, thinking about the lessons she had learned about trust. Trust was not given lightly. It was earned, nurtured, and tested through consistent action and presence. She recalled the gestures Ethan had offered over weeks, the carefully prepared meals, the prenatal vitamins left within easy reach, the small notes of reassurance, and the patience he had shown when she needed space. Those acts had spoken louder than any words ever could, bridging the gap between past mistakes and the possibility of shared future. The nursery, visible from the living area, held its own quiet testament to preparation and care. Soft blankets folded neatly, tiny clothes arranged by color and size, and a crib positioned to catch the first rays of morning sun reflected the tangible culmination of weeks of labor, attention, and anticipation. Victoria's gaze lingered on the small space, imagining the life that would soon inhabit it, a child, a shared responsibility, and a connection that neither could have predicted. Ethan approached her side, placing a warm hand over hers on the windowsill. His touch was gentle, steady, and reassuring. She felt the familiar rush of emotion, the mix of love, apprehension, and hope that had threaded through their recent days. He did not speak immediately, allowing the moment to breathe, as if understanding that presence sometimes mattered more than words. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, measured, and heartfelt. "You've handled so much," he said, eyes meeting hers with sincerity. "And yet, here you are, preparing for this new chapter with grace. I can't promise it will always be easy, but I promise to be present, to be reliable, to be here with you." Victoria allowed herself a soft exhale, acknowledging both his words and the weight behind them. She thought about the fear that had accompanied her early pregnancy, the sense of isolation, and the guarded walls she had built to protect herself. Those walls were not gone entirely, but they had softened, shaped by consistent care, shared experience, and the slow rebuilding of trust. The evening progressed quietly. Victoria moved about the apartment, adjusting a few items, tidying small spaces, and checking the nursery once more. Ethan followed, offering assistance only when needed, his presence a quiet anchor. They moved together in a rhythm that had emerged over weeks, careful, deliberate, and respectful of both their needs and boundaries. There was no rush, no urgency, only the gentle unfolding of shared purpose. Victoria's thoughts drifted to the concept of legacy, not in terms of wealth or accomplishment, but in love, trust, and the small, meaningful acts that defined relationships. She considered the life she was about to nurture, the foundation of trust and care she and Ethan had built, and the example of partnership and resilience she wished to model. It was a legacy rooted not in perfection, but in dedication, respect, and shared courage. The small pre-birth scare from earlier weeks lingered in her memory. It had been a stark reminder of vulnerability, of the fragility of life and emotion, and of the necessity of partnership. Ethan's response had been calm, measured, and unwavering, reinforcing the emerging trust between them. That moment had crystallized the understanding that they could face challenges together, that resilience was born from consistency, presence, and empathy. Victoria placed a hand over her belly, feeling the subtle movements within. Each flutter, each shift, reminded her of the life growing inside her and the responsibilities it would bring. She thought of the countless small choices she and Ethan had made together, arranging the nursery, attending appointments, sharing quiet routines, and offering support without demanding reciprocity. Those acts had built a foundation that was unshakable, rooted in shared intention and respect. Ethan moved to stand beside her, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "It's almost time," he said softly, acknowledging the approaching culmination of their journey. Victoria nodded, a mix of excitement and apprehension in her eyes. She felt the weight of the moment, the threshold between anticipation and arrival, between preparation and reality. She turned to look at him, seeing the man who had made mistakes, faced vulnerability, and ultimately chosen to show up, consistently, through actions rather than words alone. There was a quiet gratitude in her chest, tempered by awareness of the challenges that remained. She allowed herself a small, genuine smile, a silent acknowledgement of shared growth and mutual respect. As night deepened over San Francisco, Victoria returned to the window, placing her hands lightly on her belly once more. She let herself feel the warmth, the anticipation, and the hope for what was to come. The journey had been long, filled with trials, mistakes, and moments of doubt, but it had also been rich with learning, care, and the slow, deliberate building of trust. In that quiet space, she considered the audience of her own reflection, the silent witness to her growth, resilience, and courage. She wondered, with a gentle curiosity, how others might respond in her place, what choices they would make when faced with vulnerability, responsibility, and love. The question lingered, what would you do in Victoria's place? Ethan stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, a steady, grounding presence. Together, they looked out over the city, two people who had navigated fear, heartbreak, and uncertainty, now preparing to welcome new life into the world. The culmination of trust, patience, and love was about to take tangible form, a reminder that connection, growth, and courage could shape the future in profound and meaningful ways. The apartment was quiet, save for the distant sounds of the city and the soft, rhythmic breathing of two people standing together at the threshold of new beginnings. In the stillness, Victoria allowed herself to reflect on the journey, to embrace hope, and to feel the warmth of love that had endured despite the storms, the promise of family, of shared responsibility, and of careful, deliberate trust settled over her like a gentle embrace. Victoria and Ethan, standing together in the quiet of their apartment, ready to welcome the child whose life embodies their journey resilience, trust, and the enduring power of love. The audience is left inspired, emotionally fulfilled, and reflecting on their own capacity for courage, connection, and the legacy we leave through care and partnership. Victoria and Ethan's journey reminds us that true courage is not only about seizing opportunities, but also about facing our vulnerabilities with honesty and grace. Professional success, wealth, or control cannot replace the profound human need for trust, connection, and empathy. The story highlights the importance of communication and presence, showing up for those we care about consistently, not just in grand gestures, but in small, thoughtful acts that build trust over time. It also teaches that mistakes, no matter how consequential, can become catalysts for growth when met with accountability, reflection, and a willingness to change. For older adults, this tale underscores that love, respect, and emotional openness are never too late to cultivate. Boundaries may protect us, but vulnerability allows genuine connection. It encourages embracing the delicate balance between independence and interdependence, showing that life's richest rewards often arise from the relationships we nurture and the courage to rebuild what has been broken. Ultimately, the story is a reminder that even in later stages of life, the choices we make in honesty, empathy, and care leave lasting legacies not measured by material wealth, but by the hearts we touch and the trust we cultivate. Thank you so much for joining us on Victoria and Ethan's journey. If this story touched your heart or inspired you, please give it a like, share it with friends who love a deep, emotional story, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales. Your support means the world to us.